All right, greetings everyone. Very well. Welcome here from Marbella, South Spain. I'm joining you from the Roche Marbella, our hospitality university, and I'm really happy to be here. I will be talking generally about the most important trends that are now over dominating the hospitality industry, and I believe that we're all sharing the same background. As they say, South Spain is the California of so hopefully we'll be able to have something in common as well. Let me get slowly started. And before I continue, I just wanted to share about myself that I'm originally an economist and I got my PhD degree in economics in 2020. And for more than 2 years, I have been working as a professor for Le Roche. Now I'm an assistant professor as well as a postdoctoral researcher. And my field of area is besides hospitality industry, economics, macroeconomics. So you will really, really feel it in the presentation as well as data analytics. So let's get started then, let's begin. Here you can have a quick look at the outline of the presentation because technically I'll be sharing with you 5 really, really important areas. We'll start with defining, shaping a bit the macroeconomic landscape that is now available all over the world because, you know, we must have a really, really good structure, a great framework when we try to understand what's going on in a certain industry, in a certain sector. And I always suggest to follow a sort of a from top to the bottom, like a reverse pyramid, a funnel type of an approach, because we really want to know what's going on in our broad global environment, and then we can dive into the more specific details. In the second chapter, we will start addressing the business environment itself. That is true for the hospitality industry and how all those macroeconomic conditions, factors are impacting, shaping, transforming, or I would even say revolutionizing this entire sector. We'll continue in our third approach, the trends and the growth opportunities, all, let's say, shaped, affected by the cyclical nature of the entire hospitality industry that we're really, really well aware of. In the fourth approach, we're going to talk about how to detect real market demand because, you know, guys, it's really, really important when you want to start a new business or when you actually want to understand whether a company is successful or not, if they were capable of finding something that is truly needed at the given market, because if not, then you can definitely miss that market. And last but not least, we're going to talk about something really, really important. It's the unfair advantage, but let's save it for the end of the presentation. Hospitality is about trying to support multiple functions in one space. That's one of my favorite quotes, and every single time when I have to give a bit of a presentation about this industry, I always start with this little contribution, especially since the dynamic, the only thing what we are aware of is that hospitality industry is changing quite a lot. And you know, Miguel McKelvey, he's an American businessman. You might have heard about him because he was one of the co-founders of the WeWork startup, and that was one of his insights that we have to agree with that simply. Let me share a couple of facts with you before we move on. As you might know, on a global level, the hospitality industry is accounting for approximately 10% of the world's GDP. That's quite a lot. It means that whatever happens in this sector, it has a really, really significant let's say, power or contribution on all the affected parties. We're speaking of roughly 320 million people who are working in some form for the hospitality industry. And if I want to convert it into percentages, that's again 10% of the global employment. So quite a lot we have to say. In 2019, so just right before the pandemic, the international tourism, you know, within the hospitality industry, it generated a bit less than 2 trillion US dollars when it came to export earnings. And that's how it made into the top 5 economic sectors in terms of exports, alongside the other industries such as automotive products, fuels, and similar categories. However, what is even more interesting that probably you have heard that there are more and more startup businesses showing up on the horizon of the hospitality industry. It'll be something that we'll be discussing as well. And if you think about venture capital investments, we're roughly estimating more than 2 billion US dollar investments, which happened only in 2019. in frames of the hospitality industry. Sustainability is one of the core priorities. It's something that we cannot really leave out of the conversation. And also the role of some emerging markets. We're speaking of certain Asian and Latin American economies where the number of the hospitality startups is definitely on the rise. However, if these facts have not convinced you that it's something that we must really follow and check on, what's going on in our global world environment, there is something that we can still not get rid of, and that's technically perm anxiety. You might have heard of this expression, I really hope so, because it's nothing new. And this term was originally created before the pandemic, like in 2017. And it was an attempt to capture, to describe how the different social, political, and other aspects, even climate turmoil or any, let's call them generally shocks, are coloring consumer expectations and shaping consumer behavior, which actually gives a barrage of worries for all travelers or people who decide to book an accommodation. Security issues, terrorism, let's say the widening economic gap, the fact that the middle class has been shrinking for many years, the rise of digitalization, climate change, geopolitical issues. So all those things are just contributing to more and more anxiety. And it's something that can be a curse and a blessing at the same time. Because if you're about to create a new company within the hospitality industry, you must be aware of perm anxiety. Everyone believes that the pandemic is over, and at some point that is sure, but the way our guests experience and behavior and general expectations have changed, they're still gravitating strongly around perm anxiety. So if companies are not aware of these facts, then they can definitely miss a lot of happening out there. Our customers' needs are constantly changing, that's for sure, but we can say that since 2021, there is one really major dominating trend that we have to be aware of. This is uncertainty and unpredictability. Yes, it is still happening. Whatever you might be reading out there, that we're over the COVID, that we're over the economic recession, those things might be partially correct, but again, everything gravitates back to the customer, to the buyer, to the guest, and they're still taking the majority of their decisions in light of not knowing what might be happening in the near future. They're extremely price sensitive. They try to look for some kind of a stability or at least the illusion of it. And again, it's something that we must be really aware of. I do not think as an economist that uncertainty and unpredictability will leave our global economy very soon in the near future. What does that mean? We have a really important question to address. And that's the following. How could the industry itself that we are currently discussing relocate, reposition itself as a much more open, attractive, let's say tax-heavy, sustainable, and most importantly, really innovative sector, okay? After everything that has been going on since 2020. Why did I create this question here? Because if you're following what's happening with this sector, we might say that what usually analysts and companies and people think about hospitality, it's that it's one of the most traditional industries out there, right? Like you offer a certain type of a service, but there's not that much room for flexibility, right? And I agree with you because it was really true until 2020. And then things started to develop into a completely different direction. That's why now it is time to reconsider everything. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we cannot really continue interpreting the major trends in the hospitality industry, actually any other industry that you might be interested at, without truly facing the realities in light of the macroeconomic environment. I'm a macroeconomist originally, and for me, it's really crucial to have a sort of a framework, a sort of a guiding light which technically tells me the most important information about those core variables, factors, or indicators that are shaping the overall economic development in the given area where we are operating and working, right? And if I had to pick only 4 different factors, only 4 components or indicators, I would always keep my eyes open for the following ones. One of the most important factors is technically what's happening with the GDP growth rate. Whether you're speaking of a global approach or you might be technically analyzing a certain country or an economic integration, we can talk about the Eurozone for reference. If you check the latest data, let's say 2023, because that's the year that already was fully concluded in terms of collecting the information, not that promising, right? Especially in the Eurozone. There's barely anything going on in terms of GDP growth rate. And it's not really good news, because if you try to imagine that we're after a really serious recession, a massive crisis that had no precedent before, like you cannot compare the pandemic to anything. And again, I'm talking about the economic impacts of it. And for most countries, the way out of any kind of a crisis or recession is to generate more consumption, to generate more spending. If you can do that with the different, let's say, economic policy tools, whether fiscal monetary policy, supply side policy, then it means that there is a chance that the production level will rise and there will be probably a higher level of economic growth, which means out of the previous recession period, right? In the United States, it's a bit more dynamic, but it's a really, really different environment, and most of you guys are definitely there. I'm joining you from the Eurozone, so we're still lagging behind. But the problem with the European Union is that it's a really open economy. The United States is a bit more closed, a bit more protectionist, a bit more, reserved, and it also means a bit, let's say, historically higher resilience towards a crisis, while in the European Union, a lot of crisis, and I'm talking in plural, happens in a more protracted way. I'll show you some proof later on. If you are following what's happening with the inflation rate, again, it's nothing new, but we have to watch out for those indicators. And since the pandemic, there was a really, really outrageous rise in the overall prices. Whatever country you were checking, definitely there was a sharp rise of the inflation rates in the Eurozone per moment. I checked the available data for May 2024. It was 2.6, not that bad, right? The recommendation of price stability would be around 3%. In the United States, a tiny bit higher, but still people do remember what was happening after the COVID. And, it's not just like what the inflation rate is right here, right now, but the expectations of the consumers, the expectations of the guests, because if they have a very solid thought that prices will keep growing, then it means they'll be much more cautious with their spending. They will be much more careful when it comes to booking a trip, going to a certain type of an accommodation, and all those things which technically generate a spiral, right? And if way too many people are concerned that prices are on the rise, even if technically they're not, what will happen? They will actually increase further, and that's something that we have to be really careful with. Unemployment rate is the third indicator that I really suggest and recommend to always track, always check. Again, the European Union, the Eurozone is a bit more vulnerable because we are much more diverse. We're talking of really, really different member states here with different local domestic problems, situations, conditions, policies when it comes, to helping those people who are out of the labor market. So that's why you see that difference compared to the United States. But then again, if you consider to move your business to another country, do not just check what is true per moment for the unemployment rate, but maybe do a historical comparison. Check what happened in the past 5 years, what happened in the previous 10 years, let's say, trying to understand how, let's say, the local government is helping people out in a moment of crisis, because maybe those historically high unemployment rates might happen due to the fact that the government is really generous, offering a lot of support to those who are out of job for one reason or the other. So again, it's really complex, and all I'm trying to say here is we need a lot of data, we need a lot of research in order to make a solid decision. And the last really important indicator is technically the evolution of the interest rate. When they have those meetings in the United States, even the stock markets and the crypto markets resonate as soon as the decision is taken if interest rates should be cut or not. And that's something that is technically affecting literally every market player. So again, we need to know what's going on, and we need to know what kind of actions are planned for the near future. So these are those 4 indicators that I would really, really suggest you to follow tightly in case you want to be aware, because we might be, a bit neglecting with these things. At the end of the day, you want to be a critical thinker. And if you do not really know what's going on out there in the global macroeconomic environment, your decisions, your imaginations about how an industry works or how your company might be progressing, it will not have that much to do with the realities, okay? An example that I wanted to share with you, and this is a really, really great platform. So anytime you feel that you need either raw data or just want a very great platform that would show you how certain indicators evolve over the years, the World Bank has the so-called World Development Indicators platform. You can go and check it out. It's data.worldbank.org. You see it right here at the top on the slide. And it allows you to choose a really, really diverse economic, social, environment-related indicators, and it allows you also to adjust the timeline. So for example, here, just for the sake of our conversation, I trimmed the timeline starting from the turn of the millennium, so it had like a more than 20-year perspective, and just continuing our perspective that was about the United States and the Euro area. What we see here is the evolution of the GDP growth rate. So every single year you might see in percentages what happened compared to the previous year. It's super informative. And why am I doing this? Because this is the moment when you can truly understand the dynamics of how a certain economy might perform. GDP growth is only one indicator of the money, but trust me, it gives you a really solid base to catch up what's been happening around you. And if you see the European area and also the United States, one of the biggest differences would be noticeable right here, because after 2008, when we had the financial crisis, the Lehman Brothers collapsed, there was the great financial shock with spillover impacts from the United States to the rest of the world. What happened? The United States, if you just check the green line, it got out of that crisis quite quickly, right? So they were kind of on it. But the European Union generally, it was much more vulnerable, much less resilient. And what happened here? We had the so-called W recession, like a double dip recession, because the crisis came back in 2012 due to many issues in the background that I'm not going to discuss right now, but that's why the crisis turned out to be much more protracted and much more steeper compared to the United States. It's a really good regional difference because, sometimes we tend to always compare what's happening in the USA, what's happening in the European Union, how businesses perform, how industries are, showing certain signs of either vulnerability or success. And differences can gravitate back to such a problem. The pandemic happened right here, and here, besides the fact that the European area was much more exposed to the crisis, because we're talking about a fallback of more than 6%, while the USA experienced a bit, let's say, moderate fallback, both of these areas came out of it quickly. Again, it is a little bit of a recorrection here. When you have a very steep fallback, it also means that naturally that indicator is trying to come back to kind of catch back to a previous historical average. So that's why you see that recorrection. And also it was a really different type of a crisis. So one of the indicators that would be really helpful for us to check is definitely the GDP growth rate, okay? And because we know now that hospitality industry is super involved, 10% of the global GDP, and that's the thing to start with. Yet, if we try to move on a tiny bit with interpreting the business environment, let me suggest here another approach, another really good methodology to break it down into smaller components and chunks. So, of course, our goal would be, after checking what's going on in the global, or let's say regional macro area where your company is operating, where you would like to start your own business, will be to capture the latest business trends. Okay, here, really important disclaimer. When we say business trend, it doesn't equal statistical trends, right? Business trends are things, patterns, observations that are happening currently, they usually do not last that long. Let's say the most important things that companies are trying to follow, that industries are gravitating around, that's how I'll sum it up. But when you talk about statistical trends, we need much more data, we need a much more longer time period, right? Let's say 10 years in a row. And then you can really see those long and much more solid patterns that are happening behind the scenes. That's my expression that I always go for. After you are more or less aware of the business trends, it is time to continue with carrying out the solid market validation. So imagine that you are now in the process of creating a new company. You have a good business idea that you would like to pursue. And after checking on the business trends, the next step is to see if there's anything to know about market validation, because we would really like to figure out what is technically needed by the market. For example, starting a really solid market research to collect data. For example, to use the Google Trends, if you find a really good keywords that is technically close to that solution, what you're trying to offer for your future target audience, that's the thing to do. Go ahead and experiment with Google Trends. That's an amazing tool. You know that hospitality industry is horrible when it comes to finding data. It's impossible because, you know, these are all private companies and they do not publish any information, nothing, right? So you have to really dig deep there if you want to find something more solid. Or sometimes they publish those really expensive industrial reports for, I don't know, $500, $1,000, and at the end of the day, they're not that informative either. So the best thing is to find those really good platforms that can guide you with understanding on what's going on in the given area, and to do a solid validation of the business idea, to get some kind of a pre-feedback from early evangelists, from your potential target audience, to launch a landing page, to ask people how much they would pay for this and that. You know, you're just trying to really make your way through that noise, what is surrounding us. And in case you already know roughly whether your business idea would have a solid validation or not, the third thing what is really recommendable to do is to really try to detect whether there is an existing, or let me use this expression, real market demand. Because many companies fail due to the fact that they miss the existing market demand, that they do not have data, that they do not know what their potential customers truly want, that they are not aware of their competitors, that they are not aware of the specific needs that the guest would be looking for. And you know, back to the hospitality, since the pandemic, everyone is looking for customized, tailored solutions, unique approaches, human contact, high value added contribution. If you offer something that does not speak to your client, no one will be interested in it. Okay, so go ahead, take your time, but truly try to detect whether there is a real market demand or not, because if not, it'll be a waste of your time and a waste of your money. Last but not least, when you're done with the previous 3 points, there's only one more thing to do, which is technically, you know, micromanaging your business. Let me just use this expression. That's when you get down to business with creating a business plan, checking on the finance, raising your team, doing certain forecasts, projections, and it can only happen if you are aware of all those previous pillars. So again, if you try to just imagine a little funnel, like a reverse pyramid, the best way to get down to the bottom of your personal business idea or a company, let's say, definitely idea level approach, is to really know what's going on in the global environment, if that validation is truly solid, and if your potential target audience would have a demand on that certain type of a product or service that you would like to offer them or not. Okay, but do you remember when I was talking about the statistical trends and like a bit more protracted approach? This is the second part of the slide, because if you have a look at these points, these are again certain suggestions what can help you to understand at which stage of the business cycle we are now per moment. Because if you try to imagine how economies work, and sorry for too much terminology here, but that's very crucial, we are either in a recession or an expansion phase, right? We need to know if right here, right now, there's any kind of a crisis happening, or we're out of that crisis, and expansion is ongoing. Because again, it will have a really strong impact on how your potential customers and buyers take their decisions, their price sensitivity, their general, open-mindedness towards new business ideas, the way that they want to save money, they want to spend more, and all those things, they really, really are depending on the fact whether we are in a recession or in an expansion phase. So all those pillars that I mentioned before, they're showing up right here and much more than that, but know for sure which stage of the business cycle we're now at, and also read on some forecasts. If there are any rumors, let me just use this word, about a following event to show up, right? It's really, really important. Historically, there has been a strong correlation between GDP growth and revenue per available ground. So before we get lost in different economic indicators, there is something again that we have to watch out for, right? Umar Riaz, he's from EY, Ernst & Young, and he's also America's hospitality sector leader. That quote is really powerful. It just definitely made a point here, because if you are truly into detecting what's happening in a certain industry, you must be able to detect certain patterns, code movements, correlations between and among certain variables. And do you remember, again, just citing it one more time, that hospitality industry contributes 10% of the global GDP, and the labor force as well has a similar share. And we must really, really see the point here that whatever happens with the GDP growth rate, it will strongly, strongly impact a lot of very crucial indicators that we technically use every single day in the hospitality industry. When you're just checking what's going on in your company, how it performs, occupancy rates, sales, all those things really, really resonate tightly with the GDP growth rate. There have been studies, a lot of research carried out in this area. You can find a lot of data. What's for sure, if you know more or less those code movements, then you might know what to expect in the future, okay? So that's again something that we are trying to follow and to get a bit more data about. After we made all those connections, we are aware of the patterns, time to move on a tiny bit with a couple of company examples. So probably you have been noticing that we are diving deeper and deeper into all those more and more narrow approaches, and the best way to truly capture how an industry operates and what makes one company successful and another one less successful is to have a look at a couple of top performer companies and some of them that had not been able to make it. So I collected a few case studies here for us because it's a really, really interactive workshop. And I really hope that you have heard a lot about these businesses here, and maybe I will be able to share some new information about them as well. I selected only 5 here because they have something really important in common. Have you ever wondered why there are so many entrepreneurs, so many businesses that they take a step back when recession is in the air, right? When a crisis comes, most of the market players, they just don't want to take any risks. They do not start new businesses. They are staying away of financing options, mortgages. They try to be less indebted. They just really do not want to be that vulnerable and that exposed when the only thing we know for sure is unpredictability, right? We never really know the depth of the crisis. When you're in a recession, you never know when it might end, when you are at the bottom of it. As they say, you're really smart after, like in the aftermath. But when it's happening, we have no idea. There is no economist, no analyst who would be truly able to predict how a crisis will end, when it might end, and what should be the best strategy to follow. Yet, I must say that there have been a couple of companies and business ideas that took a risk, and they just literally dived into these possibilities in the middle of an economic recession. Why is it a good strategy? So let's just think about it. Some businesses are more resilient than others. Is it possible because many of them started their activity in such a vulnerable economic environment where most of their competitors just definitely took a step back? Yes, the answer is yes. There are much more such businesses that you see right here. In the hospitality industry, Airbnb, game changer. I don't even have to comment on it. If you love to listen to podcasts on Spotify, I would suggest you to search for The Diaries of the CEO. And they had an amazing show with one of the co-founders of Airbnb, Brian Chesky. He was mind-blowing. Go ahead, listen to that podcast. And he just talks about Airbnb and how it was acting, first of all, during the first economic crisis. You know, the company was created right after, or like right in between the different stages of the previous financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Those three co-founders, they were super young people, designers, okay? So they had nothing to do with business. And they just saw an opportunity. They took that chance, and what happened after, it's all history, right? A lot of investors said no to them, and later on they really regretted it. Okay, Airbnb definitely challenged, it revolutionized, it disrupted the hospitality industry, and it's been happening. If you're reading the news, it's not that bright anymore, because just literally a couple of days and weeks ago, there were mass protests in Barcelona, Spain, because a lot of local people are extremely upset that Airbnb has contributed to sharply rising prices when it comes to accommodation, rent, and even purchasing properties. So even the local people cannot afford renting a place in Barcelona because of the impact of Airbnb and all the competitors. And they have now a goal that by 2028, they should really kind of eliminate the number of Airbnbs, a lot of hostility, you know, towards the hosts of Airbnb. We can either agree with them or not. What's for sure, as soon as something becomes not regulated or way too regulated, it will have spillover impact on everyone who is involved into that let's say field of operation. But Airbnb was one of the companies that entered during a crisis, and they became one of the most valuable unicorn startups. Okay, search on this expression, you will learn what it means. The Uber as well, obviously a different industry, but they definitely disrupted, and I love this expression, they disrupted the transportation, the taxi sector for sure. Okay, it was an easily copyable model, so they had a lot of competitors. Again, the rest is all history, a lot of side impact, a lot of externalities, but for sure, they took the chance and they turned out to be super resilient with economic shocks. Buy Hours is another one. We'll be talking about this company later on, because it's one of the examples that I wanted to share with you guys. And also Hotel Tonight, maybe you have heard about it. It's technically a mobile hotel booking application originally owned by Airbnb, and it allows users in a really, really flexible way to do reservations on the same day for different rooms with the help of your smartphone, you know, something that was not really available before. And now we're all about flexibility because of this crazy perm anxiety, instability. You want cancellation, you do not know what happens to you next day if it's a business trip or anything like that, and you need access to 100% flexibility from companies, whether it's accommodation or transport, because if not, then, you know, how can we maintain such a turbulent let's say era, especially with all the business solutions happening. And the last company that you see on the slide is the Hopper. Okay, another interesting one. And according to the statistics, it's one of the most downloaded travel apps in North America. So I really hope, guys, that you are aware of it, because here in Europe it's not really a thing. And it's Montreal based, so originally created in Canada. And they are extremely useful because they allow you to cover technically anything from your flights, hotels, car rental, home rental, a lot of really, really user-friendly features that we vote for them. Okay, the easier, the better for us. And for example, customers of Air Canada, they can add Hoppers cancel for any reason option. That's how they call this possibility, to any kind of affair that you have to cover, even the non-refundable ones. And you know, it's literally everything. It's a game changer. So what I'm trying to say here, if these companies were able to see such a massive market opportunity in the middle of a crisis, a financial crisis, a health pandemic, then we must understand why they had a phase of being extremely successful. Back to the data. So I'll be shifting a bit, switching a bit between company examples and a couple of other indicators here. One of my favorite platforms that I really recommend you to get a subscription for is Statista.com. I really like it because it allows you to download the original data, and especially for the hospitality industry, where, as I said, it's a nightmare to get any kind of a data, especially in a downloadable format. This does it for you if you have an account, if you have a subscription. And I was just creating these charts on my own after having access to all those chosen variables. For example, if you have a quick look at the number of international tourists, it's a global data here. And I was lucky enough to get the data set from the 1950s. You can really clearly see what's been going on, a really nice steady increase. Apparently more and more people were allowed to travel because of reduced prices, increasing incomes, and just like more flexible options. Yet you have a look at this chunk over here, and in light of all those decades where this really impressive increase had been happening, the fallback looks extremely frightening. Okay, we're speaking again of the number of international tourist arrivals. So if you want to truly have any kind of an evidence how a crisis can mess up an entire industry, we're speaking of services, right? Then what else do you need if that's the proof what we are going for? And again, a sharp recovery. The second thing what I wanted to share with you here is about the European Union and obviously the inflation rate evolution. Right here during the pandemic, if you see the negative values, that's again related to the crisis and the fact that people are really holding back with their purchases, with their spendings, being extremely cautious. And then the supply chains just got completely disrupted, and we had a horrible peak of over 20%. Okay, that has not really happened recently, what's for sure, even if you look into historical data. And if you try to really understand why our competitors are so aggressive with their strategies, because we're fighting for a pool of customers who are really picky, really price sensitive, and they really do a proper market research before paying for something, especially when it comes to services or non-durable goods. Okay, after all this, we have a really important question. There are many problems ASAP that must be solved. Okay, in terms of hospitality industry, there's one thing what I wanted to mention, and that's the horrible shortage of labor force. It is definitely a thing. And for example, only in 2021, we were speaking of over 300,000 workers less in the entire industry. Because they just got so many other options, a lot of flexibility, perspectives to work in another sector for much higher wages, right? And the companies are now doing a sort of a warfare, right? I'm just citing what Deloitte said, one of the big four companies. There's an ongoing war for talent. The problem is that we do not only miss a lot of active workers in the hospitality industry, but the talented ones for sure. And that's a big thing, because all those positions, all those executive positions, they must be filled with talented people, educated, experienced professionals. And it's technically a nightmare now to raise such labor force. Before you think it's only the pandemic, absolutely not, because governments reacted differently on how to treat the impacts of the recession. And in those countries where governments provided more support, like more unemployment benefits or stimulus payments, many laborers decided to stay a bit longer as officially unemployed, because this way they had the possibility to do like a more proper research, where to continue, how to find a better fit in terms of their career, or maybe they decided to migrate to a completely different area. That's the thing. Skill mismatch as well, right? Like we are in the era of the AI. That has been mind-blowing, I have to say. And it means that now there is a really strong demand for those workers who are digitally really skilled, in many professions, not the university degree is the most important thing anymore. Google even introduced such jobs that do not require any kind of a official degree, but they provide you the company level training, and as long as you are well equipped with those skills, they will be employing you. Then the knowledge of health protocols, right? The flexibility to adapt to new service models, contactless technology. Not everyone is ready for that. And if you think about people of a certain age, some of them might become really discouraged. So it's super, super, super complex. Wage and benefit considerations as well. Again, when people are much more interested in switching to such sectors where they pay you much more, and you know, especially if you're at the entry level of the hospitality industry, I'm sure you have this experience, they do not pay well. It's a fact. Say it out loud. They take advantage of you because you're young, because you do not have a certain level of a degree, because you are a woman, because you are this or that. Those things have been happening, and that's why this industry got under the shade of such a bad appreciation from many possible talents, right? So these problems truly matter, and we need to do something about it. Okay, I'm raising the bell now. In what follows, we'll be focusing our attention a tiny bit towards how to detect or how to track existing market demand, right? First of all, if you have ever studied economics, even on a really basic level, you must know that when we say market demand, technically we refer to literally every product and every service that all consumers, buyers, guests are willing, that's really important. So they have the actual need. They want to buy it, that's one thing, and they're able to purchase. So that means they technically have the financial resources to buy it. Both conditions must be met in terms of economics, because if you are willing to buy something, but if you're not ready financially to compensate that, the deal will not happen. If you have the money, but you have no willingness to buy it because the competitor offers you a much better deal, again, it will not happen. So we have to be really cautious. And when you try to detect existing real market demand, you must truly find such a target audience that is willing to pay for your service, and they definitely have the resources to cover that as well if you're focusing on a bit more high-end solutions. There are several factors that impact the market demand. Usually what we do, okay, I'm going to check on the competitors. I will see how much the competitors are charging for a similar product or similar service, but that's just one of the many possible components which shape the existing market demand. So for example, if you think about the income of the buyers, you want to classify them by different income groups, you need to know which layer you would address. Is it the luxury sector? Is it something that offers rather a basic solution? Is it something in between? You need to know those answers right away, because then even the whole marketing strategy will be truly wrong. We mentioned the price of the rival goods. Again, depends, really depends. In many cases, you cannot even compare with the rivals because sometimes they do not publish the price, right? Or anything like that. Selling price. Let me give you an example, real estate industry, right? We never really know the actual price for which a property is purchased, because you always see the listing price in many of the cases, but that's not the selling price. And in some cases, there is a really big gap, like a big discrepancy. So that data is never published in most of the countries. And we might have a really wrong interpretation on what's going on with the prices, how big a bargain can be, or, depending on so many things at the same time. Number of your buyers, right? Because if you want to focus on a niche, you should count with technically a very small pool of people, but they might have really high expectations towards you. You must really please and satisfy those unique demands, or you're focusing on a really wide potential target audience, which means that you're kind of entering the market from the bottom, like mainstream from the bottom, and you need a really good scalable solution to satisfy something that most of your customers would appreciate. Because if you enter the market from the top, let me give you an example. Elon Musk with Tesla back then, he never wanted to enter the electric car market from the bottom. He went from the top, right? California, Silicon Valley, all those well-positioned rich young people who have sustainability concerns, right? That's a completely different business model. So you need to know that as well in advance. Buyers' expectations, right? Do you remember we talked about what people usually think will happen, right? Is there a recession in the air? Are we out of it? Do I expect prices to rise? Those expectations will also have a really significant impact on their final decision. And at the end of the day, you never know what people think, but sometimes it's really good to read some Reddit comments or just to talk with some people once in a while, just at least to have a basic idea of what their expectations are about. And eventually, what we just started the discussion with, trends, preferences in the industry, within the given, let's say, target audience, what the majority of people are going for. Something is trendy, something is not trendy. Do you want to sell them a candy, a vitamin, or a painkiller? It's up to you, because if you want to sell them a candy, and it's a metaphor here, okay, then you would probably offer them a short-term solution that will be really, really popular, but as it's easily copyable, a lot of competitors would show up, and it's just good for a certain period of time. You want to offer them a vitamin, which technically makes people think that they will win out of it, right? That they need it to be more efficient, more productive. And again, I'm talking about metaphors, like a business idea that would be the equivalent of a vitamin. But at the end of the day, there will be a moment when your customers realize that they don't really need a vitamin to be successful, productive, influencing others, etc., right? Or do you want to sell them something that we could call a painkiller? A solution for an actual existing problem. Because if you can hit that point, your business will be predestined to succeed, at least for some time, right? Because nothing is constant. Airbnb, Uber, they were all painkillers because they found a mutual problem what many, many people shared in common. And then what happened, they actually offered them a really great solution that turned out to be a good option and worked for many people for a lot of time. Okay, and what you see here at the bottom of this slide is that since the pandemic, most of the businesses turn out to be really successful if they create a so-called on-demand approach, right? You know what the problem is, you have a solution, but provide that solution when the problem emerges, right? Not with a delay, because then no one will be interested in that solution. Hospitality industry is turning more and more towards those on-demand business models, that's for sure. And I see it as a really, really good sign, okay? You want convenience for your guests. You want fast reaction. You want the human touch. You want them to feel that you're right there for them in the moment of need. You want to take care of any kind of a desire that they might be having. So if you know what it means, that you might be able to become much more successful, okay? And it means there are a lot of such companies which truly want to offer an on-demand strategy, an on-demand solution. And I wanted to mention some of these businesses. You might have heard of them, and technically one of them was coming from the United States. And this company was getting a lot of attention. It got a lot of popularity. It offered something that truly became a thing after the COVID, when traveling became either a restriction, it was impossible, and people decided to discover much more their own country. Okay, we're talking of a company that was actually a startup business, and it's called the Cabana. Maybe you have heard of them, okay? The trend that they were capturing and utilizing was the remote work and travel. If you're a digital nomad, if you are someone who is trying to find an affordable solution, but you are more interested in discovering the local culture. If you're a young person, let's say an urban millennial, young professional, you're looking for adventures, but you either do not want to pay that much or you cannot afford a full experience as a traveler, and all you need is a nice RV, okay? So they created those well-equipped RVs. Have a look at this, it's a screenshot from their former website, which was the perfect, amazing, well-equipped, modern, Instagrammable vehicle. You could go, you could book it, you could go around the country. It was a so-called hotel on wheels experience, and no one was really offering a similar solution back then. We can say it was a high-tech camper van, and apparently they were recreating a sort of an Airbnb business model, but in a much more flexible way. People usually paid on average $200 per night. And this company was created in 2019, so they were really lucky, right? Like pandemic was kind of just about to happen, and then they just took advantage of this opportunity. At the beginning, they were able to raise $3 million in a funding round. We're speaking of 2022 end of the year, and a tiny bit later on, it went all the way up to 10 million. So a lot of investors truly saw the possibility, like a great opportunity, right? Like what else is needed? There is a problem, people cannot travel, they're price sensitive, let them travel in their own country with an amazing, well-equipped RV, so they can save money and they can still share their experiences on Instagram, right? At the height of its operation, that company was running around 70 vans in 5 different markets, and they were serving around 4,000 guests, over 20,000 nights in total. But you already see this little statement here. This was one of the startups that, despite a really promising beginning, they failed in 2023 and they had to officially close down the business. What could have happened, right? We cannot be so self-confident that even if you enter the market in the middle of a recession, you're predestined to succeed and nothing will change, okay? What happened? Technically, it was a really, really big problem that they depended on a physical product, right? Like you were selling not the van, you were selling the experience, you were selling the trip. And the guests, they were using vans, right? A physical product. And it means that you cannot use it that many times. Like if one van is in operation, then you cannot use it for another purpose at the same time. So they were really, really restricted with the number of the vehicles. Apparently it was expensive to maintain them, and they did not possess those vehicles either. So the owners of them decided not to continue with this collaboration. And they were just not scalable. That was behind the scenes, right? This company was not scalable. It was not able to grow despite the initial funds, despite the positive expectations. And finally, what happened is that there was a bubble that burst in terms of the interest rates, as we know, and gas prices also continued to really rise. And it caused a 49% decline in our shipments over that year. So that's why that business was not able to continue, okay? And I wanted to share this example with you. So, it's really important to always stay on point with all the indicators, with all the resonations in your close business environment, okay? Because it's something that might change a little bit from one day to the other, and then all your money and all your work is gone, okay? Luckily, that's not the last example what we have, because I brought you some pretty optimistic solutions that turned out to be much more crisis resilient. And one of them is the so-called Stens Living. Maybe you have heard about this startup as well. This is technically a housing concept created in India. It's an Indian startup, and they are on the rise. So they're just really now getting more and more successful, because guys, there's a pretty big problem out there, not just in Western countries, but all over the world. If you're a young professional or a student, sometimes the cost of living in the bigger cities, they are not realistic, okay, due to many reasons. And they technically provide fully furnished residences with a lot of amenities, meals, internet, laundry, different services, housekeeping, security, community engagement programs. So it's not just a place that you can rent. And you can cover all those expenses with the help of an app. So there's like a third party between you and the landlord, let me just call that way. Much more security, prices are really affordable, the app is super easy to use. You're kind of always under the impression that someone is taking care of you, and it's technically a company that is a very modern solution. They organize different events, different gatherings, And, you know, eventually it creates that high value added impact that, of course, you pay for a service. You're using an apartment, things are taken care for, right? But you also grow a network, you meet new people, and it just causes you the sense of growing into a new experience, which is the definition of the hospitality industry. So that's why this company is now on the rise, and you can just really read some more data about them, how successful they are. That's their website in case you would like to check them out. They have their venues available in more and more cities. A lot of residences are joining this program as well. And I think it's a really important issue that they are addressing, because we're living in the era of globalization. The cost of living are rising. It doesn't matter if you're in the USA, if you're in India, if you're in Spain, but there are more and more young people who are running for the same jobs. Competition is on the rise. Inflation has been increasing. Our salaries are not adjusted with the inflation, so you never really get such a rise in your salary that would truly compensate what had been happening with the inflation in the given country. Our parents' generation, it's a different thing. They had technically less competition, easier access to resources, properties, cars, jobs, but those days are over. And it means that now there are much more vulnerable young people who have no idea what to do about such a basic necessity as their own accommodation, right? And imagine that they have a prestigious job. Imagine that they work for a very successful company. For example, if you have heard of the Buddy.com, it's BADI, a Spanish startup. They created a sort of a Tinder for finding a room and sharing an apartment with someone else. Because back then, again, in Barcelona, even many years ago, it was relatively expensive for young people. And even if you earned a lot compared to other areas, just proportionately how much you had to spend on your living, your rent, your, I don't know, utilities, it did not really leave you that much room in terms of your disposable income by the end of the month. So that's why such solutions are on the rise. And I'm sure that you even know more than what I'm presenting you right here. And I believe that's the future. They are all on-demand business models. They were all capable of finding some kind of a mutually shared problem that is involving way too many people out there. And some of them could really make it into a scalable solution, okay? With constant adjustments, pivoting, truly following the constantly changing needs of people out there, because that's how a business might be resilient in the long term as well, okay? So just a little bit of a summary here in light of what I shared before about the previous two companies, that in terms of the hospitality industry, disruption is happening, and there is a really growing demand towards the disruptive solutions. So let's start thinking in a new level. Let's stop imagining this sector as a very rigid, traditional, boring industry, because it's not true anymore. Why? Because our guests demand different things, and that's something that must be our most important target. Last but not least, a third company that I wanted to share with you is another pretty famous startup, which is the By Hours, okay? And it's technically nothing really new, because they were created in 2012 in Spain, Barcelona. So, you know, like in the aftermath of the previous financial crisis. But they disrupted the hospitality and the accommodation sector in a way that you are allowed to book only extremely short stays. We call it as a micro stay. Okay, so for example, imagine you have a business meeting, you need a professional environment, and you would like to book something only for a couple of hours. You don't want to pay the full price for a whole night, for 3 days, or for a week. They allow their possible guests to make reservations for 3 hours, 6 hours, and maximum 24 hours. So that's super flexible, okay? I think it's amazing, because there had been no such solution back then, absolutely nothing, okay? And why not? Like, you're trying kind of to slice up all your available resources, the rooms, when something is not utilized, something is not sold, you know, why would you let it just sit when certain people would just pay a tiny bit for using it only for a short period of time? I think the idea is brilliant. And since since 2012. It's on the rise, okay? Christian Rodriguez and Guillermo Gaspard, they were the founders of this business idea. And they have now over 600 destinations, more than 24 countries as well. And it means that it will be, again, something that is an easily copyable model, but you know, when you're the one who is the first mover, who is the game changer, it puts you on a certain path, on a certain trajectory of growth, especially if you can really, really take advantage of that initial phase when all the competitors are just, you know, shocked, all right, what's going on? Why was I not able to see that there was such an acute problem out there? Okay. And apparently they have so many users, over 250,000 now. So it's, again, another really, really solid proof that they were capable of catering an actual existing real market demand. So go ahead and read more about these guys, okay? A couple of, I would say, takeaways, because we are really approaching the end of this presentation, at least the part where I'm giving you my insights, my contribution. And I just wanted to highlight here 4 really important things that will be just always there in the near future. And whatever we do, whatever decision we have to take, we need to pay attention. One of them is obviously the really, really acute rise of the technology, AI solutions, and not just that, but the way that there will be always those companies discovering completely different market demand, okay, flexibility. I will share with you a really radical, shocking example. If you have ever read about South Korea, you probably know that the people of South Korea, they work a lot. So their workload is mind-blowing. First of all, because of the work culture, and because legally companies are allowed, you know, to ask people to work those hours every single week and every single month. And what happened is that some of them have a really desperate need for a digital detox, as I'm saying, because they're always with their gadgets and they just cannot say no to themselves when they would like to stop a bit with using their phone, having access to their emails, their social media. And a couple of years ago, a company in South Korea technically created a so-called prison for people, not a real one, like a fake prison, like a sort of a mock prison, where you can go and you can spend there 48 hours. You would be deprived of all your gadgets, all your phones, your devices, your laptop, everything. They will put you in a cell. You'll be an inmate. I'm not joking. Google on it, search on it. And you can meditate. You will not really be talking to anyone. You have no contact with any human being. Obviously, they provide you food. You have your own cell. And, you know, it just really physically restricts you to be deprived of that constant anxiety that comes with the devices and the digitalization and work requirements, okay? The only way people can do that. Not many of them, but this company is becoming more and more successful. So search on the data, you will be shocked for sure. It's another game changer in the hospitality industry because it does belong to this sector, right? It does. Again, you provide a very special accommodation for people that have a really, really acute problem, okay? So that's something that I wanted to share with you, and maybe it'll be thought-provoking. The third thing is apparently upskilling, okay? I mentioned before that there is a horrible lack of talent now. What can be done? Universities, schools, different centers, foundations, but even the employers themselves, they should be, and they are already offering much better, much more practical, much more flexible solutions when it comes to training, right? There are things that we are learning by doing. There are things that are changing almost on a daily basis. And it's something that you cannot really, you know, study, you cannot grow into it, but you just have to do it every single day. Just to watch out for the trends, just to grow into a company's certain practices. And upskilling is really important, and it'll be a really, really drastic change in the near future. I am telling you, it will happen. So to sum it up, it is a paradigm shift, what is ahead of us. A couple of other really important things that are now on the rise, or that we are expecting them to be happening in the next few years, is there's an expression that I want you guys to remember: hospitality economy. You know, we talked about the fact that hospitality industry makes a really, really big chunk of the global GDP. and also the labor force, but it has like a sort of a hub, a sort of a whole area that we would call as a hospitality economy that has its own rules, its own methods, and we really need to follow what's going on. Okay, it's really brand sensitive as well. So if you have a look at this little second bubble here, you must be able to recognize what your guests will want tomorrow. If you do not know that, your competitors will do so, and you will be out of the game. That's super important. Everything's about tailored, unique solutions as much as possible. Forget about mainstream general approach. It is not happening anymore in this industry, okay? Really important, retreats, health consciousness, and luxury, okay? Do you remember we talked about the COVID, we talked about all the anxiety that comes from work, not just in South Korea, but anywhere, right? It's like if you're in a job, you know how much pressure we are under every single day, and people start showing more and more desire to attend different retreats, different services that help your technically mental health, your physical well-being as well. They pay a lot for that, especially in the luxury sector. Really an opening thing now. Go ahead, dive into it. Maybe you would like to do your own retreat, your own business in this area, but it's again something that will be happening very dynamically in the near future, okay? It's really not a forecast, it's like a sentence that I wanted to emphasize by the end of the presentation. Whether you like it or not, but global circumstances will always have an impact on the hospitality industry. So you have to follow what's happening in order to take the right decisions, okay? In many cases, especially when we talk about bigger brands, franchises, customers, investors always check if sustainability criteria are met, if your hotel is a corporate citizen, as I'm saying, if you have something to do with the green hospitality. It's again a sort of a demand, especially from the millennials. If you do not have it, you might lose out compared to your rivals. So it has to be really understood, and a lot of people have really bad idea what green hospitality is. I think we're talking more and more about it. It's definitely a drastic change, but it has to be a bit more, let's say, well structured, a bit more accurate. Here by the end, hire the person, not the resume. Super important. Do you remember we talked about the importance of trained workforce, skilled people, those who are showing up every single day, those who definitely have the motivation and the drive, because we're talking about not workers, it's human capital. Even in economics, it's a really important input, human capital. If your people, your most important components of your business are not the right fit for you, then you cannot continue, then your success will not be maintained, okay? And last but not least, because I'm also teaching data analytics and I'm using a lot of different statistics and data, I must tell you that forget about anything which is not data-driven when it comes to decisions. And now with all those AI tools on the rise, it's easier and easier. But at the end of the day, you have to interpret the data. You need to understand how they work, how to make a prediction, how to interpret the trend. So everything must be supported by data, because it really shows you what to expect, what's happening, historical comparisons. You cannot just speak out of the air, right? It's super important. So whether we like it or not, but those people who will understand the data, interpretations, analysis, they will be much more advanced compared to others, okay? Just a brief conclusion. All these things we have already discussed, and what we have not touched until now was apparently the role of the cryptocurrencies. Have you heard of the Bitcoin house, right? There are so many new things to follow. A lot of vulnerability, a lot of opportunities, but definitely I think that will be with us, and we have to just keep our eyes on it, okay? And also the rise of the collaborative or sharing economy. So anything that is similar to Uber, Airbnb, and even much more modern solutions, they still kind of keep contributing to this concept, to this phenomenon. There we go. I do not have a presentation without mentioning Steve Jobs at some point, okay? What I selected for today, innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity and not a threat. Really powerful quote. And what else to add? We definitely need to get used to the innovation, and whether it looks scary or not, whether you feel that you're not a professional of something, you do not have experience, you do not know what to expect, you live in Perm Anxiety, right? You're not sure what is going on. See it as an opportunity, see it as a chance to grow, whether it's good or bad, period, but go for it, take advantage, because you know there is nothing worse than having regrets. And that's what I can say. So what is your unfair advantage, guys? Have you thought about it? If you think about yourself, your growth, your career, your ambitions, either it's hospitality industry or not, think about it. Do you have something very special that might not be easily copied, recreated by others? And such things can be as simple as your education, as your talent, as your analytical skills, as just the fact that you're showing up every single day, that you follow the trends, that you analyze the data, that you stay open-minded, and that you have a really strong passion to anything that you're doing, because then it will keep you on the surface and it will open doors for you wherever you are. And as I have just finished my official part, it will be now time to open some room for a little bit of a Q&A. If there are any interesting questions that you would like to ask me or just to share anything, leave them in a comment and I will be happy to respond to some of those.
Thank you so much, Krisztina. We already have a couple questions here, so we have like 10 minutes to answer all of them. So here we go. The first one is, how can hotels balance data collection with guest privacy concerns?
That's a really good question. It's something that I believe is a strong disadvantage of the hospitality industry. But what is also true, if you try to be very objective, if we do not have access to real data, either, you know, like private data about our customers, then we will not be able to offer a solution that is matching an existing market demand, okay? You have to make sure that your guests, your customers feel safe about sharing that data. You cannot have any, I would say, such tools that would shed any bad light on your company, because you know there were many leaking cases of the data and such scandals. Once they affect a company, then the trust is gone. Trust is super fragile. So I believe it comes with a certain level of maturity of companies when those customers who are even coming back to you, they feel safe about sharing their information. Even, for example, if you just send them a survey, a questionnaire about their experience and more or less about their expectations, such things as how much they would pay for this or that special service, for this type of a room, for something extraordinary. And then, you know, it's not that sensitive at the end of the day, but it gives just a bit more of an understanding what they would be able and willing to pay for, okay? Because besides, you know, their private data, like passport number, name, or anything like that, you know, they're crucial for registering people, security reasons as well. But what is more important for a company, I believe, is their actual feedback. So you really have to incentivize them to share their honest feedback, because that's the only way you can pivot, but also their expectations for the future or their possible reaction on something new that you would like to introduce. You have to test it. And I believe that probably there will be such applications which truly will incentivize people to be honest, to give them some kind of a discount, anything that will definitely trigger the response, but also guaranteeing that it's all anonymous, that it's only for the purpose of improving the service, and good luck with finding the way to do so. But I believe that's the key, and I am aware that many companies cannot do that. That's why we do not have access to that data, or customers do not feel safe about sharing that data with us. I hope it was sufficient regarding your question. Anything else, let me know.
We have another question here. It says, how does inflation or recession impact the revenue per available room and GDP growth in correlation to hospitality?
Yeah, so technically it's something very easy to address, because of course, especially if you think back of the previous economic crisis, due to the physical restrictions and, you know, this really bad price sensitivity of people, the fact that most people started to cut back on their consumption, and now I'm talking in a macro perspective, like imagine a country and all those consumers, all those guests, anyone who is considered as a consumer, they started to develop those really negative expectations regarding the rising prices or the fact that they were limited with certain options. It meant that technically they were not utilizing those services anymore, or they were truly reducing the number of their trips, or even they kind of scaled down in terms of prices, affordability. So as soon as we hit a recession phase, like a contraction, and I'm speaking here about the business cycles, occupancy rate or any similar indicator in any of the hotels will definitely be affected by it pretty quickly, because it's super volatile. Like you have a look at any historical data, and we always say seasonality is there, like you cannot help it. There's always high season and low season. But on top of all that seasonality, when we're talking about an economic crisis, it will be definitely having a much more significant impact on people's spendings. Okay, and I'm using plural, not because it's a grammatical mistake, but in economics we always use plural for the spending as well. So you just have to adjust it. You have to offer more flexible solutions. You have to think of any alternatives of generating revenues, because they will drop for sure. As soon as consumption drops, as soon as the GDP growth rate is kind of falling back due to the fact that there is recession in the air, all those indicators will move down. So that's why there's a really strong co-movement, as I said before. Question: how will you address that problem? How will you build a tiny bit more resilience? Because hospitality will be seasonal forever. We cannot help it, right? We cannot help it. Question: can you make it a tiny bit more moderate with some kind of a creative way? That's what might be a good unfair advantage for a company. Thank you for the question. Anything else?
We have one little question here asking, what was the name of the app? This one came pretty early on the lecture, so I'm assuming it was the first app you mentioned.
The first app that I mentioned, let me kind of jump back to the beginning of the presentation, because I had a slide probably right here, maybe one of these guys, if that's what you were thinking. I think I did not mention any apps before. So besides this one, did we get...
Sorry, I think it was one before. You said that they could check some data in this one app.
Oh, okay. So maybe if it was the economics related data, it was the World Bank. One of them was the World Bank World Development Indicators, if that's what you're thinking, if you're looking for like macroeconomic indicators. And another one that I mentioned that was the trends, the Google Trends. If you just search in Google Trends, that's when you can choose any kind of a keyword. And you know, you go to the chart version of it, and you would be able to see the number of searches on Google as a search engine from literally anywhere from the world over like a certain period of a time, starting from 2004. I do not have it on the slides, that way you did not see it properly. Google Trends, super simple. It allows you to download the data in Excel, and then you just choose like a right keyword, whatever it is, and you'll be able to even select the country, to select the timeline, going back in time until 2004, as far as I know. And then what you will see, the number of searches coming from Google towards that given expression. And the best part about it is that it creates you like a sort of a map, a world map, by coloring those areas where the biggest number of searches it was originally generated. So it's something that might be an alternative way to find data, because yes, we do not have that much options in the hospitality industry, but if you find the right keyword, the right expression, whatever people are searching on, in case of Google, that's technically real market demand. I even teach it in my classes, for sure. Go ahead, Google Trends, or if you're looking for any rather macroeconomic data, the World Bank, you know, the international organization, and that's the World Bank World Development Indicators, literally this link here, data.worldbank.org. You don't even need this part. And then there will be like a little search panel, and you will be able to introduce, I don't know, inflation rate, unemployment rate, different types of GDP, anything that is needed. Go ahead, it will allow you to get the data from 1960 in most of the cases for all countries of the world until these days. And it's only up to you what you'll be doing with that data. Okay, so I hope I was able to answer this question as well.
Thank you so much. And yes, I think that was the app, the World Bank one. And finally, we have one last question. It says, Do you think hospitality workers are somehow threatened by new tech such as AI?
Well, it's a really intense discussion that has been ongoing since AI is on the rise, since ChatGPT is happening. I believe that the truth is always somewhere in between. Because if you think about those people who come from a much more vulnerable background, either financially, education-wise, or simply because they were really stuck in a certain industry or position that was not really having such options before, they will be really, really exposed to all those spillover effects, or let me call it negative externalities. And those people will be easily, replaced by digital solutions, robots, AI. You don't have to go that far. A lot of restaurants already work with robots, not just cleaning, but serving. And it's amazing because you can save a lot of expenses. Yet those are such simple jobs that might be easily created by some kind of a machine. Well, if you think about those who come from a much more stable, diverse background, who have a lot of experience, who are capable of learning, who are open for new opportunities, and definitely those people who are not really afraid of taking risks, and they create anything that is high value added, their jobs will never be under any kind of a threat. But yes, hospitality industry will be really, really redefined by the rise of the AI, the rise of the robots. Just check on what's Elon Musk been doing now. He's all about Optimus, right? The robot solution. Let's see how it goes. I'm really curious. But again, there's always, the creator and the object of the creation. And I believe that there is nothing new under the sun because humanity is always going for innovations. They're really cyclical as well. We always reach a higher level of something, but then we find another existing problem that we should overcome. And those questions will never be ending. So I believe, again, depends really on your background. There will be no industry as an exception. When it comes to the rise of the AI and digitalization, the question, where can you position yourself? Do you want to be the creator, the shaper, the game changer? Or do you want to be, let me use this word, the victim of the digital revolution, in case you choose to stay passive, not to follow what's been going on, not training yourself, not educating yourself? Because, with all that social media and all this dependence on everything which is online, we're becoming so pushy with literally everything. And I believe it's a really big problem. Never allow yourself to be stuck at some level and not reading the news, not checking what's happening in the economy, not looking out for competitors. Be always on fire, be super passionate, and then you will be the one who will enjoy the benefits of the AI era and whatever is ahead of us. Definitely, I would suggest you to do so. Be critical, but also be passionate, and just try to always join those who are kind of thinking a tiny bit ahead of the majority of the mainstream. Okay, so I hope that these recommendations were also helpful. When it comes to this last question, let me know if there's anything else, maybe.
Thank you so much, Krisztina. I think we have one last question, and it's any recommendation regarding software or courses that they should use since they're working hospitality, and that could help them for their future. That's the last one for today.
Perfect. Well, any other maybe platforms that I can recommend, if it's about the courses or any other tool that you would be able to use for the hospitality industry? Maybe just back to the first one of the first questions, I mentioned another tool that was the Statista.com. It's also really good when it comes to the hospitality industry, and definitely anything where you can find industry level data or something that allows you to generate creative keywords. So as a technical comment, just try to find as many applications as possible which provide or create you data that you can rely on.
And I think this is the end of the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Krisztina, for your insights and for everything. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I hope all of our students were able to get a lot of insights that they can apply and use in their day-to-day life and in their professional careers. So yes, thank you so much. And just a little reminder that you guys can find the lecture in our YouTube channel starting tomorrow, just in case you need to go back to review anything. And thanks again, Dr. Krisztina. We're really happy to have you here, and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to have this little conversation with you. I hope you found all those facts and insights useful, and I really hope that you'll be passionate about following the latest trends and happenings in this really, really diverse and challenging industry. Thank you again for allowing me being part of this webinar, and I hope that I will be able to see you in the future as well. Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you as well. Thank you, everyone.